Hello, welcome to the Music Ally Focus podcast with me, Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow. And this episode is part of our most recent Music Ally Insight report, of which there are 4 per year. And who else to have as part of an Insight report-related podcast than Music Ally's head of Insight, the man, it says here on my notes, we call Mr. News, Stuart Dredge. Hi, Stu.
Hello. It's going to be really disappointing if I have no insight to share, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, I've talked you up and the pressure's on. So the Insight report that's just come out is the one about music technology. Catch up on the space, look at some of the best emerging music tech startups. Because that music tech space is what drives a lot of the innovation and new revenue and opportunities in the music business. So we're taking stock of that space in this podcast as we start to nudge into the tail end of 2024. Now, Stu, I've got 3 big topics here to talk about. But the first one is sort of a bit of an acknowledgement and taking stock of where we are within that acknowledgement of the fact that the music industry has gone through a number of rapid tech hype cycles in the last 5 or so years. Now, we mentioned this in passing quite a lot in podcasts in the past, saying, oh, hey, remember when it started with sea shanties and all went from there? But I just wanted to sort of go over this a little bit, first of all, to set the context, but also to sort of take a look back and say, well, this is what the music industry is doing in relation to new technology, and is it the right thing? So just as a sort of swift catch-up, in the last 5 years, the music industry has got very excited about live streaming, NFTs, sort of in this order, the metaverse, then Web3 technologies, and now it's going loopy for AI. I may have missed some other hype cycles in there. Please correct me. First of all, when you look back now over about 5 years, what do you think about how the music industry has reacted to the emergence of these new technologies?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, do you know what it reminds me of? I was thinking about this. You know how some people sometimes patronize older people about technology, like, can't work the remote control, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes an older person will go, you know what? I have lived through so many new technologies, TV, blah, like computers, and people say, oh yeah, you've lived through more disruption than I can imagine. I'm not going to patronize you. I feel like that's the music industry a bit, in that people outside sometimes still like to say, doesn't like technology, it's scared of it, blah, blah, blah. But when you look at all the stuff that's come along and you look at all the things that people have been getting to grips with and trying to do things with their artists, it's been, like you say, it's been a constant wave of there's always something new that we're trying to figure out. What does it mean? What can we do with it? Is there any worries? Are there any excitements? So I think that's one thing. There's been a lot, and it's rather than the industry running away and cowering at the sight of all these new technologies, there's been a lot of work going on
So that's always the context, isn't it? That when you talk to people about this, they say, well, we got it wrong in 1999 and we tried to sue the internet out of existence and protect our gatekeeping of access to music, and that was a disaster, and look where we are now. And it's taken this long to get revenue from recorded music, for instance, back up to where it was in 1999. Blah, 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 blah. We know that. So, okay, sure. When I say the music industry, perhaps I'm talking about the main players, the major rights holders, the major labels, etc., etc. So these new technologies have come along, and you're right, they've jumped in with 2 feet pretty much each time.
A footballer fouling, or do you mean enthusiastically diving into a pool?
Well, question mark, which one?
I do feel like the music industry, it likes a savior when it comes to technology. There's usually one thing that everyone is banging on about. Like these things, they all kind of happen at once, but actually the hype cycles were very much one after the other, weren't they? Like I remember the days of the smart speaker hype cycle.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I know. And it was always men would get on stage at places like Medium and go, everyone, I've brought my Echo with me. Alexa's brilliant. You should all buy one. This is the future. And that was like a whole year of people telling everyone to buy smart speakers. And then we were like, oh, I don't know, blockchain. And like you say, we went through. Yeah. So I think that is one thing. We tend to get very excited and say, this thing is the thing. And then what happens is usually it doesn't quite deliver on the hype. The hype moves elsewhere, but then people carry on doing stuff with it. So I think all the things you've mentioned, there was a peak of hype, but there's still stuff happening with all of them, even NFTs and Web3, which is probably the biggest trough of disillusionment. there's still stuff going on. So I feel like we have this, we get overexcited, then we move on to the next thing. And when the excitement moves on, that's when the work begins of actually, right, what is this really meaningful for that isn't just a headline of blah does something with blah, which I think there's a lot of, we like getting a headline. There's a lot of projects that are done and you think that's just to get a headline of we are very cutting edge. Look, we're using whatever this year's tech hype is. But yeah, so I think that it's a bit rambly, but I think there is this much longer cycle of work and experimentation that kind of outlives the hype cycle, and that seems to be the pattern we're in. And maybe that's a bad thing.
I guess my question is this the best way to go about it? Because, okay, the music industry is a hype industry. That's what people in it are trained to be good at, right? To hype up an artist, usually. But then these technologies, I'll pick one sort of fairly random from the list. NFTs, which seem absolute, which, the absurdity was there at the time. But when everybody around you is doing something that seems absurd, and when to be specific, I'm talking about selling a JPEG for millions of dollars. We have to report on it and sort of say, well, this is what major label XYZ is doing.
People bought land in the sandbox.
Yes.
Loads of money. And then no one really talks about how much that land is worth now.
Well, this is where I was going with that, which is, there were some major players in the music industry who then, as the NFT craze sort of merged into the metaverse craze, companies were paying enormous amounts of money, millions, to buy virtual exclusive space in metaverse areas. And what did those investments look like? I mean, okay, they're getting a stake in the future, if you like, but is that the right way to go about it?
I mean, you've got to try and fail to understand things. I think, I'm quite a big believer in you learn by trying stuff, and when it doesn't work. So I like there's a company I'm really interested in called Supercell, who make mobile games. They're like one of the biggest. They make Clash of Clans. They made some very successful mobile games, and they've got this famous culture, which is when they'll beta test a game, and then people play it, and then after 3 months they go, it's not really working as much as we thought it would do. We're going to cancel it, and they have a party and they toast the lesson of failure. Like they toast the fact they tried something, it didn't work, they've cancelled it, but it was worth doing. So I sort of think that's a really good approach. Like when something comes along that's interesting and new, you shouldn't just sort of stand back and go, well, I don't know if it's any good. I think it's really good that you just dive in, two-footed or otherwise.
But is the music industry doing that? Is the music industry now, the people and the parts of these major companies who specialize in innovation, having invested, 4 years ago in a lot of virtual land in metaverse, or in investing in NFT companies, and so on. It's completely plausible at the speed of turnover in the music industry that the people who signed those checks have moved on, and then the company is left with this investment, right? Okay, that's normal in most businesses. But is the music industry actually putting its sort of money where its mouth is and saying, well, we're in this for the long haul and we're going to change, we're going to kind of chip away at this? Or are they kind of going, let's just plant a flag in this, and then if it comes good, in 10 years we'll come back to it and we'll take advantage of that? Because that sort of feels a bit old-fashioned, if you see what I mean. That is out of line with what you've just described.
Maybe. I mean, I remember things like even something like augmented reality, which never quite was one of the big hypes.
I forgot about that. VR.
It wasn't one of the big hypes, but I remember writing about the Rolling Stones putting sort of cartoon gorillas on skyscrapers in an AR campaign, and there were lots of things jumping out of chocolate bars and so on in other campaigns. There was an era of AR weird, wacky campaigns. And then you fast forward to today, and there are Snapchat lenses for musicians that are doing millions and millions of videos and views. I suppose what I think those early, sometimes batshit, sometimes good experiments took the people who did them, wherever they moved to, onto this point now where actually we were doing AR 10 years ago. Here's something now that's mass market and scalable, and we'll do cool stuff. So I do think there is often a through line where things are a bit weird and experimental, and then 10 years later they're just being done, they're being useful. And obviously we're not 10 years on from NFTs yet. Who knows if maybe there'll be...
If only.
There'll be something in... But no, so I don't know. I think we tend to jump in and experiment. And like you say, I think maybe sometimes there isn't such a long-term through line. But I suppose one good example I was thinking about recently was people started to say last year, oh, the metaverse, that was all a hype, wasn't it? That was a bit silly. And yet, since people started saying that, and the hype moved on from metaverse to AI, I think was the transition. But then since then, Fortnite have done their festival, like the biggest game in the world has done an entire music mode and has been doing big artist stuff. And Roblox has done all kinds of more ambitious music things since then. And we got to the point now where I think the hype has gone away, but the stuff that's actually big and real is rolling out in that area. So I do think sometimes these things, there's lots of headlines, lots of kind of weird experimentation, lots of kind of hypesters as well. I mean, that's what's quite good, I think, when those people disappear. People come in saying, we're going to revolutionize the music industry with blah. Yeah. Or we're going to sweep away the gatekeepers with blah. That was a big blockchain thing back in the day.
Yeah.
When those people go away, you're left with the people in that technology space who really do get music and want to do good things. And the people in the music industry who weren't just following hype, but actually have an interest in making it work. So I guess it's a long way round of saying, I don't think it's entirely bad that we jump onto things and do silly things and get a bit carried away, as long as we learn the lessons. And often I think we do learn lessons, and some of the stuff being done now, it bears out those lessons from like 4 or 5 years ago of whatever was hyped at the time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess there's, there are winners and losers in any kind of tech developments. Although, yeah, I guess my sort of thinking was, well, if you're gonna invest a number of millions of dollars in essentially an NFT, in virtual land in a metaverse space, what if instead you invested, I don't know, a bunch of $200,000 investments in the kind of companies who are still trying, I'm still hearing from, they're saying, hey, it's still really difficult to get a licensing deal done in the music industry. So it's almost like it's easier in some ways to sign off a big check for a big hype thing and go, oh, well, kind of didn't work, but we're doing this stuff over here. But actually that kind of nuts and bolts of grinding forwards, there's a little bit of balance there. It'd be beneficial over there as well, wouldn't it? We're talking about hype, but really the kind of developments that we're interested in are a little bit, or that make a difference.
There's an argument that spending £1 million and losing it on NFTs might teach you not to spend £10 million on NFTs, at least. Like, I think there's some value in trying stuff and going, yeah, it didn't work, we won't do any more of that. We've learned our lesson. But yeah, I think
I will teach them that lesson for $500,000.
Launching an NFT. But I think the one, we may get onto this later on, I think, is the one danger is we do like something that's whizzy and shiny. And I think maybe sometimes technology that is more boring and prosaic from the outside, but actually more meaningful, maybe doesn't get a look in. Like, maybe you could have invested that $1 million in financial tech for tracking royalties and clearing up mass data, that sort of thing. Like, I think some of the companies in those spaces maybe sometimes struggle to get as much publicity as someone going, we're revolutionizing everything with a whizzy technology that's brand new. So that is the one thing I think maybe either we get sucked away from those things, or maybe it's just that those things don't get covered as much and people are quietly using the background. But yeah, so I think that's the one danger of the approach of here's a shiny new thing this year that everyone's talking about, is there might be something that's not so shiny but is more meaningful to your business and the artists you represent.
And I would also say, in the context of a music industry which has laid off a lot of people in the last 2 years, we've seen across all the major companies, all the major players in the music industry space, whether they're platforms or labels or whoever, laying off a lot of people, significant percentage of their business, up to 25% or more. And those are real human beings who have to go through the process of finding new jobs. And that's because those companies want to save money. And I can understand why some of them feel slightly sour when they see the kind of splurges of money at that top end into technology that literally seems absurd at the time. But I guess that's a cultural thing again, isn't it? It's about where you put your cash. Talking about putting cash into something which looks very exciting and we're not totally sure of long-term developments, my notes here say, oh God, I guess we need to talk about AI. Okay, I mean, look, let's take stock here. AI and music, there's so many different facets of it. let's talk about it generally, because there's so many different ways that AI impacts the music industry. But where are we at in terms of what we've just talked about, which is the music industry getting kind of ditzy and splashing money everywhere because of this new cool technology?
Well, so I was looking, in fact, I'm looking up as we speak to find out. We wrote our first story about AI and music in December 2014. So it's nearly 10 years since we wrote our first story about AI, which is kind of fun because for 8 years of that decade, it was our weird niche that no one else seemed to care much about.
Yeah.
And now it's every other story.
And I imagine we've written probably 90% of those stories in the last 2 years.
I think so. But I think, so where we're at, I think there's a structure to industry announcements about AI when they're sort of addressing policymakers and they're doing lobbying. And that structure is like, we recognize there are many good things that can be done with AI by the music industry musicians, and then most of it is about the buts. But
It's a mix-a-lot approach, I believe that's known as.
But I think that's where we're at. We're like, we understand that it could be really interesting in lots of ways. And I think the industry is investing in that and companies are getting funding. But the vast amount of energy and coverage and hot air is around the kind of the negative side of AIs being trained without permission on music and deep fakes. And so we're kind of in a situation where, in a way, the hype around AI is the opposite of hype. It's kind of terror about.
But that's because the major rights holders are genuinely scared about AI, aren't they? Because they can see it eating their like a significant part of their lunch.
Well, I mean, no one knows. That's the thing. That's the terror. No one knows. Like, literally, no one knows. Like, again, we have this kind of, it's not quite a paradox, but you have announcements where it's saying an AI cannot AI can't do as well as a human can at writing a song and lived experience. Like, we say that very confidently, while also kind of everything else we're saying suggests we worry that it can, and we're terrified of that. So we're kind of caught between those things of like thinking AI can't replace human music, and then begging politicians, please make sure it can't replace human music, which suggests we're not as confident. But I mean, it's weird. AI, it's so big, it's almost meaningless in that there are several specific technologies go, like machine learning and neural networks and different kinds of AI. And also pretty much everything can be described as AI now. Like pretty much every startup has AI in its press release now because everything is using it. And it ceases to mean anything when every single startup says, well, we've got some algorithms at work behind the scenes, so we're AI driven, blah, blah.
Yeah. My favorite, by the way, for those of you listening, if Stu and I receive an ungodly number of press releases every day, and it's a job to sort of navigate through them. But one of the things that keeps me going when I'm reading all those press releases is to try and identify the ones that are doing something with NFTs, but are working really hard not to say NFTs or blockchain or anything like that. And I wonder if we're going to sort of hit that point with AI soon, which is people are going to start saying, well, perhaps AI, we don't do AI, we do machine learning, we do big data.
Right, saying we're an internet startup.
I mean, that is the parallel, isn't it? That the big shift, it's such a big and wide shift. It is like the shift to the World Wide Web. So from the internet existed since the 70s, but it was the web and web browsers that enabled what we think of as the internet today. And that was an enormous shift that in the late 90s that was absolutely revolutionary. And it's the same sort of, it feels very similar, as people who are sadly old enough to have lived through that, it feels very similar. Although I will say that when Netscape was on the up in the late 90s, the Netscape Corporation weren't restarting a nuclear power plant on 3 Mile Island to power the service. But, like whatever works, I guess the thing is, I was going to say about this is that, okay, we're sort of through the hype cycle. We're now realizing it's sort of embedded into everything in the music industry. And that what you put your finger on there, that fear has been the through line through all of this. From the very earliest days, we talked about it in terms of fear on panels, should you be scared about it? Is it taking our jobs? That kind of thing. And now that fear has sort of mutated a bit, but it's still there. There's clearly something real in that feeling, whether the fear is justified or not. And that does sort of suggest that this technology is going to so fundamentally change what we know of as the music industry. I would argue that the layoffs that you're seeing at major companies are in advance. They're getting ahead of those people being slightly irrelevant at those companies because AI is going to replace part of their jobs, right? And there is data to show that this is happening.
That's every industry, isn't it? Yeah, everyone's.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. There's so much to talk about AI. I mean, like, there's a couple of things. There are a couple of things we're worried about that I think are quite simple. So deep fakes is one example where I think you find very few people who in the industry who disagree with the fact that unlicensed, permissionless deepfakes of an artist is not a cool thing to do. It's not cool. How you stop it is much more difficult. That's not an easy problem. But I think the thing there is it's not just a music thing; it's also a politics thing. For example, and when something is not just threatening the music industry, but it's threatening democracy, I think you're going to get people. You're going to get people in charge, lawmakers, policymakers are going to be keen to do stuff. So I think we're already seeing that with these acts around kind of like no fakes and stopping deep fakes. There's buy-in from politicians, and it's not just because of music is saying this is a bad idea. If someone can spoof Drake, it's politicians saying what happens if. So that's one thing. I think there's the thing we've been covering recently about the intersection of fraud and AI. That's an interesting but kind of a simple area in a sense, in that if you're going to try and get fraudulent streaming royalties, you need a lot of music getting a few plays. You can't just do one song, get bots to play it a billion times.
Yeah.
And the only thing really that to do that kind of scale of music is AI. So I think we've seen that recently with the kind of the arrest and charges going on in the States.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see again. I think that's going to spur a lot of energy in terms of what are the AI companies' policies? How do they report if someone is creating hundreds of thousands of tracks and releasing them? Distributed. There's going to be action quite swiftly there. I think again, the idea that if you use an AI to create 100,000 tracks and then try to get bots to play them, who thinks that's a good idea apart from the people trying to make money from it? Yeah. So again, that's kind of simple. But the real big thing I think is this issue of training. And what's happened this year, because I mean, we've used all the AI music services because we were curious about them down the years. And this year, Suno came out and Udio came out. And both of them are now being sued by labels for allegedly training on commercial music without permission. And they've both kind of said, we have trained on music owned by major labels. I think they've been quite upfront. And what they've shown...
Yeah, because their approach is, it's out there the text-based ones scraped all of Reddit and Google Books and whatever. Right?
It's a fair use battle, and that's going to happen or not. But I think what it proved is, if you train on lots of music, including the good stuff, your system will be better. Like Udio and Suno are both really, really good, sort of objectively in quality compared to what came before them. And normally you think technology will get better just through technology getting better. But in this case, I think you've seen this technology get better as a direct result of having better music as the input.
But that is what AI is, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a technology which is based on the input. That's what makes it AI.
So that is like, I think that's a real challenge for the industry, and that's why there's lawsuits. Outcome unknown at the time of recording. They'll probably settle it now.
Yeah.
After we record this, but it also shows like how crucial those catalogs of the labels, major, independent, like that work of artists, human artists, it shows how crucial that is to these things being good. Like the quality of an musical AI depends on the human music that goes into it. And that is a point that if you try and strip it out from the legal battles, which I know is hard, that's the platform to go forward on. Right. If you are an AI music company, your thing isn't going to be any good unless you have good music. So that's the impetus to get a deal done. It's threatening to sue. It's like, for your stuff to be good, we need to figure this out. And what I think, as we talk, what hasn't been really talked about much is, what do those licensing deals look like? How do you license something that you're not sure if it's a threat to a human artist or not, or how much? You're not sure how much money it will make, not sure what the business model really is yet. How do you license it to say, yes, train on my entire catalog, even though I don't know how big this is going to be and what the impact is going to be?
We talked about this at the start, the music industry saying, well, we learned our lessons from 1999. Isn't this the exact same thing? In the 1999, the music industry was completely disrupted by the ability to share files on web browsers, right? And they went in with the 2 feet legally. And here they are again, faced with another clearly threatening, something that threatens their business model that's based around centuries-old copyright rules. And once again, they're going in with 2 feet with legal threats and, cajoling politicians and so on. I mean, we've seen how that's gone in the past.
Is there an argument that in the past, the way that went was Spotify came along as a legal thing afterwards? Is there
right?
I know it's again a counter-narrative thing, but is there an argument that suing Napster, did it set things back, or did it pave the way for something legal to come along? Like, you could argue that point.
For sure. But is this the best way to do it? That's what I'm saying, because clearly you only have to scratch the surface of the technology, and you can say, well, you know what? I mean, look, I spoke to Ed Newton-Rex of Fairly Trained, who said, well, look, he didn't say this. I'm strongly paraphrasing. Excuse me, Ed. But he said, well, basically the cat's out the bag because the companies that have, let's say, trained on music they didn't get permission for, they can say, okay, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll release a new version of our AI model, and this is only trained on synthetic data, which is songs made from the previous model. So we're sort of air-gapped from your catalog, if we did use it, right? So that you're using an AI that has been trained on all of the pop songs you know and love, that then creates millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of songs. And then that catalog of new songs is used to train a new AI, and you can see where that's going. And really, if that allows you to capture 10 or 20% of the music industry's revenues, which sounds completely plausible when you think about it, music that's incidental music, or music that's used in games, or music that's used as muzak or whatever, right? That sounds possible. So that kind of feels like I don't know how you stop that. And then the second part, is we're talking about the same technique of saying, well, we have copyright, and the music industry has based its entire business model on strongly defending the copyright of their rights holders. But we're entering a period now where those copyright laws might suddenly have reached in some areas, the end of their useful lives. And like you said, there is going to be a conclusion to this, but I'm sort of questioning the wisdom of, is this the right way to go about it?
I think, yeah, and no one knows. The frank thing is, no one knows. Like, you'd love to have the hindsight to go forward 10 years and go, right, is this the right thing to do? Because we literally don't know. We don't know what these things are going to become. We don't know how they're going to be used. Like, for example, I think when I interviewed Udio from Music Ally, they were they talked about this as being, this is like a social technology. It's how you write a song for your friends. It's how you send a message with music. Like that. And there may be an extent to which you say that because you don't want everyone to think you're going to eat their lunch. But there is something interesting like that about this idea of when you make music making so easy that all you have to do is kind of interact with an AI. There's this future where these services open up huge amounts of music making, not to release on Spotify and streaming services, but to communicate with, for example, send your friends. And if the music industry gets a slice of those revenues, you mentioned like it could easily eat 20% of the music industry's current revenues, and I think you're right there. But what is the new big pie, possibly, that music rights will have a share of?
But from the music industry's perspective, it's only a bigger pie if it relates to their rights that they hold, right? If these companies come in and grow the pie, but they're not connected to the traditional, what we think of now as the music industry at all, okay, you and I can say, well, look, the music industry is growing, isn't that nice? But from the perspective of the people who hold the power right now, they don't. Then they're now a smaller percentage of this bigger industry, and the balance of power shifts. And there's going to be knock-on effects of that.
And that's what I think. Like, if I step aside from all the industry stuff, I think there are some very exciting uses for this technology, and it's around democratizing music making and giving people a way to communicate using music that they have maybe written lyrics to, maybe create something. There's something powerful and exciting there. And to make it really good, it's going to need licensed music from the music industry. So it won't be as
Why?
good.
Let me push you on that. Why is it going to need licensed music?
Well, because we've seen with Udio and Suno that when you have licensed music, it's better. And like, I understand what you're saying. You're saying with synthetic audio, at some point you don't need that music. But I think at the core level, there is a sense that you need good music. good in, if you put rubbish in, and I'm not even. I mean, I'll defer to Ed Newton Rex on this, but I wonder if you just train it on the stuff it's created, at what point are you a dog eating its tail?
Well, yeah, it does sound like you're sort of
humans come up with new ideas,
thinning things out and smudging things a bit. There, you lose the rough edges.
Yeah. So,
but then, for a lot of use of music, if I'm writing a song for a friend, that's fine, isn't it? And that is a separate business to license music. And also, I've used this example before, but I'll say it again as just a sort of final point to think of, which is, if somebody just wants to, and you'll soon be able to do this, just spin up an AI instance on their own home machine, train it on the catalog of a certain artist or bunch of artists at home, and then start producing songs. How's anyone going to prove anything? Like the music could be made. You could then take it away, re-record it with your band, and no one would know. And okay, I accept that. Is that likely? I don't know, but
maybe.
While those question marks hang in the air,
but I think the point I'm trying to get to is there could be this big new area of music usage that generates money, and I think for it to be good, the AI companies will need licenses, and for the music industry part of it, they need. So I feel like where we're getting to is the lawsuits are going to be inevitable, but what we're working towards is deals. I think there will be deals. I think we'll end up with deals. We'll end up with licensing agreements. And then we can figure out what this thing is really for and how much money it's going to make and how that money is divided and who gets it. But so I feel like we're in the period now where we're establishing, right, I mean, these lawsuits are essentially to establish, can you train your musical AI music without permission? We don't know. Like, the music industry says, of course you can't, but we need a court to tell us that. So that's what we're getting. And so, it wouldn't be surprising if a settlement comes because one or the other side or both sides isn't sure who's going to win. I think that this is hogging so much time and so much energy, but we shouldn't ignore the fact that there's all kinds of other things. Like, people are experimenting with AIs to clean up catalogs and add metadata to them. That's going to help people make more money. Using AI in royalty tracking and payments to get artists paid. Using AI to market music and to help artists know when to advertise and where and how. Like, there are a lot of ways.
Booking tours and things like that. It goes back to the way you and I talk about Web3 technologies, which is it's probably going to become part of the infrastructure in a kind of boring way. And we instead of booking a tour the old-fashioned way, we ask our AI assistant to help.
There's this cliche it's a massive cliche that wankers say, but it's that whole thing about if you don't use AI, your job won't be taken by an AI. It will be taken by someone who knows how to use an AI. That's the kind of thing people say.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's kind of true. So there is, I think, in terms of how the money in the music industry flows, there is a thing where if you are using AI technologies in all kinds of ways to book your tour, to do your marketing, to track your royalties, then you may be getting more money as a musician, as a music company, than someone who isn't. So I think there is that challenge, is that while we all argue about training musical AIs and the legalities of that, we do as an industry need to get to grips with all the other forms of AI and how they could change our work. And the music industry in 10 years' time will be people who understand how to use AIs and work with them. And for musicians, that could be good because there'll be musicians who use this in all kinds of ways, creative and business, and it helps them earn more. So that whole thing about, like, we do need to talk about the industry pie and who gets it and how it grows and shrinks. But I think on an individual level, AI is going to have an effect on so many individual people.
Yeah. I mean, there's a fascinating thing that we always take care to talk about the DIY and indie end of the market, and that's the fascinating part, which is it hopefully will enable DIY and independent artists to grow their individual pies, right? And they can book tours more easily. It's like having a team without the people, and they're suddenly able to, with some smart planning, actualize all the things they want to do and they couldn't do previously. All the stuff you've mentioned, marketing, outreach, touring, whatever. That's fantastic and exciting, and even making music should not be overlooked. But it does, and I think is vital and is what's going to happen, and that's great. But it does tie back to this kind of big headline thing, which is the battle for rights, because those people own their rights, right? And so the people that own the rights are going to hopefully make more money and do better, and everything's better. And it comes back down to this one point, because this is a power struggle, and it's with the most powerful, moneyed element in technology and job creation in the world, which is Silicon Valley. And if there's one thing that those companies are very happy to do, it's to battle in a zero-sum game for something that they believe is rightly or wrongly the way forward. And what I think we might start to find out is exactly how robust the music industry has successfully defended its rights for many, many years based on these existing laws, because it always made sense. And now it's no longer making sense. And if that doesn't sort of work itself out in the way they want, I think we're going to see some fairly fundamental changes. But for the people, which it's equally applicable across the music industry, but for the people at the bottom of the pyramid, it just doesn't matter, because they already own their rights and they're doing their own thing and their life's going to get better. But for the people at the top, it becomes slightly more problematic. So that's where I think we're going, in my opinion, just to offer an alternative narrative.
Yeah.
But I do want to move on. We've been here we are flapping our mouths talking about hype, and look, and now we're guilty of it. Finally, other areas of music technology that are not AI, even if it says it in the press release. Music technology is something you've covered for a very long time now. If there's one person I trust to stick his finger in the air and predict which way the wind's blowing, it's Stu. So, music technology, what are areas of interest that are promising but perhaps not getting the hype while AI gobbles it all up?
Yeah, okay. So I talked about music fintech, financial tech. I think it is getting some headlines now, but I think fintech is a huge industry, and music fintech is still relatively under the radar, but I think there's so much more to come from that. Tracking, calculating royalties, just everything around the kind of the finance and the flow of the money. So it's not always an exciting headline. It's not like this thing will revolutionize blah, but I think there's cool stuff there. I'm personally interested in climate tech, which I think is still a niche, but from eco vinyl to batteries at festivals to there's some technologies coming along now who's saying, right, music industry wants to reduce emissions. We've got a technology that could help.
And it's coming online quickly. We saw recently the Amsterdam Arena, which has a roof of solar panels and a giant battery, and they're going to start doing big stadium gigs that are totally powered by solar power that's stored in the battery. Now that's a big development. You've got Coldplay doing sort of simultaneously doing like good things in terms of figuring out how to tour better, and then plowing money back into the bottom of the pyramid of touring. So they're sort of solving two problems at once. Around money, and they're still making loads of money, and really fantastic progress there. Two types of sustainability for one they've managed there, which is I guess what you'd expect from them. And yes, you've got festivals sort of trying to prepare for the switch over away from diesel generators to big batteries and stuff like that. This is an exciting space, isn't it? But it's almost as if we talk about it like there's no money involved there.
Yeah, it's on the side.
Money, but you can. All those things I just mentioned are
that's it.
billion-dollar industries.
There's technologies that aren't musical technologies, but are just technologies that will help companies reduce emissions, and music companies could use them. So there's all kinds of stuff. So that's interesting. I think medical tech is interesting, and I say medical because we've talked about health and fitness in the past, and those things tend to be stuff like Peloton, like things that will help you get fit with music, and that was a period of. I think. Actually,
I forgot about the Peloton hype, by the way. That was one for our hype cycle earlier. I forgot, but yeah.
Well, that was like live streaming. That was a lockdown thing,
yes,
I think.
That's right.
Everyone's got a Peloton, and everyone's streaming music live. And then as we got back to normal things, people stopped buying Pelotons and stopped watching live streams. But medical tech, so like treatments for like dementia and Alzheimer's and strokes and Parkinson's and rehabilitation, depression, and all kinds of. And this is not just some startup person going, "I've got an app that can cure depression. I need some music for it." This stuff has proper medical pilots, needs to be certified, like genuinely like serious therapeutic stuff. And Universal Music has been pushing this a bit.
Although I will say that does sound like a perfect use for AI, doesn't it? I don't want to go back to AI, but if you need specialized music for an individual to work on very person specific treatment, it sounds like a good job for AI.
It depends, doesn't it? Like, so for example, the stuff that around dementia and Alzheimer's, some of that music, like it means licensing music that isn't the obvious fit for startups normally, because you're probably licensing music that those people remember. A lot of these treatments are about playing the music that they remember from their youth. So that's like a whole area of suddenly music from the 60s is an exciting thing to license for a whizzy new startup because it's But I think this is going to be really interesting. The fact that music can have really exciting, tangible effects on people's treatments. And I think we're starting to see, and you don't get as many of these. It's not like anyone could just set one up. Like you could set up an NFT company, like so. They generally have there's a higher bar to vault to get the technology working and have the science right, and then license music. It's quite a difficult area. But that's exciting. And I've got a prediction for revival, my last thing.
Ooh, go on. Yeah.
So I think smart speakers might get a bit more time in the limelight again. And the reason for that is we've been writing a little bit about Amazon's plans with Alexa, and there's a new Alexa coming along that's going to be much smarter and conversational. And it's that intersection of
is that because of AI?
It's because of AI.
Yeah, right.
It's smart speakers meet ChatGPT. But like this idea of like smart speakers, you basically told them to do things, didn't you? Play this, play that.
Yeah.
And I think the next step on is going to be, it'll be like chatting to ChatGPT, chatting to an LLM, it'll be a conversation. And maybe that will drive a second wave of devices. And I think music will have some interesting things there. And I always thought it was quite exciting. What if you could chat to Alexa or Google Assistant or Siri about how you're feeling? What I listen to? I'm feeling a bit blue. I'm hungover. I like this. And they go, here's a playlist for you. What do you think of that? What do you think of this? Have you heard this new band? Now, maybe everyone doesn't want to talk to their smart speaker in the kitchen, and this sounds like a terrible future. But I do think there's going to be another wave of speakers meet conversational assistants. And I think that could be interesting. And I think
I agree with you. It does sound fascinating. And these will become, I think, de rigueur. Our current understanding of smart speakers is going to just, and Siri and things like that is going to just fade into the background as we get new ones that are actually good at doing what we want them to do. For example, I don't use Siri for anything else other than setting a countdown timer for 7 minutes while I'm boarding an egg or whatever. That's what it's really good at, right?
But when it gets when Siri goes to you, I'm good for more than boiling an egg,
Well, I don't worry about hurting Siri's feelings until Siri gets really good at it, and then maybe. But I mean, the thing you've just described, which sounds completely plausible, which is, hey, sentient home speaker device, I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling like I need to get in the zone to do this piece of work or whatever. Play me some really good minimal techno or some lo-fi hip hop or something to work to get me in the zone that is designed to help me get in that flow state. And it says, okay, here you go. Here's a stream. That's going to be AI music, isn't it? That's not going to be licensed music.
I don't know. What imagine like going into house and going.
If I say, go on, play me some David Bowie, it will do it. But every other circumstance, anything that's based on mood or situation, if it's easy enough to go down the AI generated route, it makes sense to do it, right?
What about discovery though? What about like, I know nothing about minimal techno. Play me some minimal techno. Well, okay.
Right. But then in that case,
here's a famous track. What do you think of that? Would you like a deep cut next, or would you like me to tell you some more about the people who did this?
Right. No, that sounds really great. I'm
niche. I think it's niche. Like, I feel like it's not going to be the thing that sells these devices, but I feel like
I think it might be. I wonder if it might be the thing that sells the devices, because that kind of contextual introduction to music is completely essential. It's why we still, listen to music radio, for instance, and still read reviews, even though those are incredibly reduced areas of contextual information. I don't know anything about jazz, but I would love to understand jazz. And so a device that could talk me through it and say, right, okay, Miles Davis, so let's start there and work backwards. That would be great, right? And that does sound like a big ticket thing to sell the device on. But when I come back in after a few weeks of that and say, hey, device, play me some more of that jazz that I liked, why not just play an endless AI generated stream, unless I specifically ask for Miles Davis?
I'm more confident in humans than you are, I think. No. But so I want to point to two things happening now that lead me in this direction. One is Spotify's AI DJ. It just talks at you. It tells you stuff about songs.
Yeah.
What about the next step is surely you talk back to it. You talk back to the DJ.
And I can think of something to say to it already, actually.
Play me some more jazz I like. But the other thing is, like, there was a thing, and it's Meta's big thing of helping anyone create their own chatbots. This idea of making it accessible. So what about a future where you have a thing that can talk to you in your house, or your entire house can talk to you, which is worryingly HAL-like in terms of it can shut you out. But If things talk to you, and then it's very easy for brilliant labels, artists to create conversational agents for it. So you could have, I don't know, if you like house music, the Tool Room Records conversational agent that teach. So I think there's something in the future that's going to be, okay, it's voice plus device plus AI plus the ability for people in the music world to create the agents in this. I'd be quite excited about that. And I don't know how soon or how it makes money or anything, but I think there's something coming in that intersection between voice and device and AI.
I do agree with you, because of course that's the most natural interface, just talking. That's what we do well, and it's been demonstrated already with ChatGPT that their sort of voice interface seems very, at least superficially, good at the moment, but it will get better. And I think, yes, I agree with you. It does sound very exciting, and the convergence of all those things into sort of every device, every area, everything. Depending on how terrifying you find that, it's going to be helpful and useful. And this is a future which sounds exciting and scary in equal measure, and we'll see how that goes. I still wonder, with that future, it does sound very, very different to the established model, and I do wonder what changes are going to impact the music industry as we know it at the moment. It sounds a lot more multifaceted and complicated, and thus will probably need to change in the same way. Look, Stu, we could rabbit on all day, and indeed will do. But thank you for all your insight and talking us through all that stuff. And of course, if you want to read more about music technology at the moment, you can track down our Insight report if you're a Music Ally subscriber, and in there, Stu will have written about a whole load of really exciting music tech startups for you to investigate, plus some other goodies. So, Stu, thank you very much.
That's okay. Thank you for having me on.